All right. So today what I'm asking you guys to do is to draw a skull. If you were not able to follow along in class, then this would be a good reference video for you. So we're using a skull because it is a classic art item to draw. Also a kind of timely thing to draw this time of year. So this is the skull we're going to be working on. All right. You can find an image of this in the Schoology folder. They're a little higher resolution than this, so I'll be pulling this in and out as I'm working. Keeping my lines nice and soft and looking for shapes. First, I immediately see that there's a large circular shape in here. It's not perfectly circular, but it is something I can identify. So I'm kind of looking beneath the surface to see what I can find. I also notice there's some triangular shapes, some squarish shapes, and some rectangles, all kind of hidden in here and put together underneath. So I'm going to use those to help put together my drawing. So I've got a circle shape going to get started, adjusting and finding it as I go, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Now what I'm going to do is draw a construction line across to show where the top of the eye sockets are going to be. So I'm going to put that right about here, because what I noticed is that the eye sockets take up about a bottom third of that initial circle when I measure it to the rest. So if I take this and compare that, it should be roughly a third of that space, 1/3. If it's a little bit more or less, I can adjust my line to accommodate that, right? So I want about the bottom third of the circle. Inside that circle, I can see a rectangular shape for the rest of the jaw here. It's a this line is implied. I can't see the entire line there, but I can get it placed in there to help me build the structure. So I'm noticing that. Also, that size of that rectangle is roughly half the size of the overall structure. So if I was to go from the top of the head to the top of the brow here and bring that same length down, that's going to tell me about how large that rectangle needs to be. Once I've got those in place, I can start placing some of the cavities for the nose and the eyes. I'm going to start with the nose because it's right in the center and it's a good way to keep things balanced on the left and the right. So when I look at the nose, I see that it crosses right across the circle that I've drawn. It's a fairly substantial size. Kind of looks like an upside down heart. So I'm just going to roughly put that in. It's a little bit wider at the bottom. It doesn't really come to a point, but it still has that overall heart shape. Taking that up. The eyes themselves line up with the outside of the nose there, right? So I can draw an invisible line from the outside of the nostril to the inside of the eye, and they kind of have this squarish shape. It's rounded on the edges, but it's not really that circular. So if I was to kind of give myself some guidelines, let's say the eyes kind of take on this type of a shape. Now I know this is coming right up to the edge here. That's fine. I still have to add my cheekbones in. So I haven't added everything in yet. Okay. And then I've got those in place. Now I can add in my cheekbones. When I look at the cheekbones, I want to pay attention to where they line up with other parts of the skull. So the cheekbone here is coming in right underneath halfway on the eye socket. Halfway is up here, just below halfway. The other part of the cheekbone is lining up right with the side of the nostril. So if I was to follow out from here and from here and put just a couple of marks as guidelines, I can use that to draw how the cheekbones are going to connect to the rest of the skull there. Same thing on the other side. When I look at the drawing, I see that it kind of hits on the outside and more or less the same. It's a little bit different. This one's a little more curved and angular, but you get the basic idea. So now I've got the structure of my face coming into play. The teeth, when I look at them, I'm seeing a couple of curves, so I want to pay attention to that. And the overall size is roughly half. Like, so if I was to go from the bottom of the nose down, and then here again, it's doubled. So if I was to divide this space in half, that would kind of give me where my teeth line would be, and I'm going to end up bringing them down a little bit more, but that's a good size there. And across the top of the teeth, there's a slight curve, right? So I can give a slight curve as a guideline there, but the bottom of the teeth have a more pronounced curve because they have different lengths. So they line up and curve around the jaw, and they have a more pronounced curve going around the outside. Now I'm ready to start putting in some of the teeth. The teeth are symmetrical, so they start at the center, and they are a little bit thinner at the top and wider at the bottom. There aren't too many, so I can actually count and draw in each individual tooth. There's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 wrapping around that side. So I've got 3. They become a little bit thinner as I move around. This one's broken here. So as they start to wrap around the sides of the skull, you see less of the surface area of each tooth. So I've kind of got all of my major shapes laid out in different areas. Now it's time to start refining my lines. So I'm going to come back with an eye on the edge of the contours and follow along with my pencil and look for the individual little changes. Notice there's a bit of a bump up here, and as I look, I notice that the side of the head is not quite as round as a circle. It kind of flattens out a little bit on the side. It curves into the cheekbone, and there's actually a bone coming out, a ridge for the eye line here that kind of comes up onto the temple for the socket. I'm going to bring this down here. Start refining these edges. And the socket itself has a couple of different angles in it. It's a little bit wider on one side, and just kind of refining those edges. This kind of curves underneath a little bit. It's a little wider. A lot of little nuance and subtle changes in the skull. You can spend hours drawing this accurately, but to get the basics down, this should work. Remember, those initial shapes I drew were guidelines, right? They're structure. They're not definitive. Everything is subject to change and refinement. So I can add details, change the shape of things. Start to bring stuff out a little bit more. It's not too bad. Excuse me. So that'll work as a quick foundation. And now I'm going to get into some of the values. But before I do that, I'm going to take my eraser and remove any lines that are going to interfere with my next steps, with my shading, and are distracting or getting in the way. So now that I've got that, I can start to come in and add a little bit of value. I'm going to start by putting in the darker areas I see first as a medium gray tone. I'm going to start in the middle and then go lighter or darker from there. I don't want to start too dark off the bat. I just want to get my medium grays in place. And I can see that this skull is pretty heavily lit on the right side here. It's got a little bit of shadow on the underside of the cheekbone and a little bit here, but it's almost mostly in half. How it kind of starts to shade it, and I'm looking for those shapes of the grayed areas. Once I've got some of the grays, and now I can start to come in and find those deeper areas of shadow and start working in more of the gradient that I've been practicing. Right, I can notice that underside of the cheekbone, and then here's a little bit darker, coming up into the bridge of the nose. It kind of transitions across the top of the skull here. I could easily spend an hour or 2 hours drawing this, but as of now it's been a 10-minute sketch. A little bit of shadow in between each of the teeth here. So if you missed class or need a refresher of how we put everything together, this video is for that. But take your time. Don't rush through as quickly as I did. Because I am just trying to demo it for you and not make a 30-minute video. There you go. Not too bad. Good luck. Looking forward to seeing your results.